Greeting, proud sons of Rome.
Yeah.
Episode 3. The title of this, and very much the theme of the book that we're going to be covering, or the text, I should say, and the principle that we both want to get across with this episode. In 4 words, my very quick mental maths there is correct, is this: triumph over your defeats. That's the general principle of this poem, this ancient classical poem, and that's just a very good mindset to have towards life, towards things in life, and something to keep in mind, whether you're going through hard times, whether you're going through good times, but particularly if you're going through hard times, right? Just keep in the forefront of your mind. Seek triumph over your defeats. So welcome to episode 3. Thanks for listening. So yeah, as you can see by the title, the text we're going to be covering, I think this is our first literature episode, right?
It is.
Yep. Is one of my favorite books ever, the Aeneid.
Yeah, this is the biggest episode for you, right?
Yeah, I love this. I've read it so many times, and funnily enough, the first time I ever read it, I finished it on my Kindle on the plane to Rome.
Oh yeah.
So
very timely.
I was fired up to get there, and then yeah. So the story, I think we'll have to save the really complex backstory to this story for another episode, because this picks up where Greek mythology ends. This is sort of a continuation of the Greek story through a Roman perspective. Roman literature, Roman culture, Roman history, and you can feel it when you read the Aeneid. It does read very differently to the Iliad, to the Odyssey. It's very different to Greek literature, and yeah, there's so much to get into with this episode. So,
do you want to quickly just explain the path of how it gets to the Aeneid from the Iliad and the Odyssey?
Yeah,
just very briefly.
Yeah, like not to get into the depths of it, because it's one of these. The brilliance of Greek mythology is its complexity, and so to keep it a very, very simple explanation to the backstory is the Greeks wage war with Troy for reasons which we'll have to get into in a future episode, because they are very philosophical and insightful. The Greeks wage war against the Trojans for 10 years, and at the 10th year of the siege, they finally win. And they win by deceiving the Trojans, as the classic principle of the Trojan horse, right? That's how the Greeks defeat the impregnable walls of the Trojans, is by deceiving them with a great wooden horse, through which they hide some of their craftiest, most cunning, conniving little Greeks.
Odysseus.
And, yeah, the Trojans take in this horse, they bring it inside the walls, and then during the night, once they've all finished partying and they're all sleeping, all the Greeks climb out, they open the gates, they all come in, and the Trojans are all raped, killed, and burned. And the story of the Aeneid is the story of the few Trojans that survive the sack of Troy, and they escape the burning city, and they, led by the main character, Aeneas, who's somewhat Trojan royalty. He leads the survivors of his people across the Mediterranean, across North Africa, through all sorts of perils, into Italy, where they settle, and after innumerable wars with the Italians, establish the stately walls of Rome. And so it's essentially the Roman mythology behind the founding of Rome. And it's this great epic of struggle against adversity, of finding, like we said at the beginning in the opening episode, finding triumph, even in the depths of the darkest, most embarrassing, worst, most painful defeats that you have. It's about overcoming them and striving through the difficulty and triumphing over it. And I just love that idea. And it's this brilliant story of that, of a man leading his people to a safer future and out of danger. And yeah, so that's the general story. It's the story of it's the story of hope. It's the story of sacrifice, of discipline, of courage. It's the story of war, of love, of duty, in all of its ugly and beautiful forms. It's the story of human struggle against
Adversity,
misfortune,
right?
adversity and misfortune and deceit and the Greeks.
So yeah, it is pretty applicable to your own life as well, because you know, a lot of people, if you're struggling to, I don't know, start a business or get a job or repair or make a relationship healthy, you're going to be in those dark times when the walls of Troy have been burned down and you've been pushed onto the Mediterranean with no plan and nowhere to go. But that persistence, that fire inside, you have to keep it going and you can't give in. Because look at what Rome became in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the brilliance of it, is that, like, as I'm sure everyone knows, just to that point, James, is like, from the ashes of Troy, Rome rose and actually overcame Greece. And it's this brilliant kind of idea of moving past the defeat and seeking triumph within it. And
I feel like the adversity, as long as it's not too bad, will make you a better person as well. Because it builds your character. And it really, like, makes you value what you have a lot more than if you were just like, you know, you pressed a button, you were given $1 billion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we touched upon this in the first episode, right? Yeah, that's absolutely true. The difficulty in achieving something is what gives it its value. It's what gives it its value. And yeah, that's a brilliant point. And it's funny because it's not just true; it's also true in its magnitude, right? The harder something is. Say you have, everyone's had this formative experience in their life where things just sucked.
Yeah.
Right. For me personally, it was a breakup. When I was 21 years old, my first serious relationship with a girl ended, and it leveled me. Just all kinds of things I'd never experienced, things I'd never thought I'd ever have to do with, just hit me like a wall. And I was left, as we'll get to it, like you said a minute ago, right? It's as if you're like adrift on the Mediterranean, and the will of heaven is against you. It can sometimes feel like. And yeah, everyone has these formative dark experiences, and if you are so fortunate and driven enough to overcome them, you do look back on them and see them as these incredible processes of transformation, if not at least painful lessons to learn. And yeah, you're absolutely right.
So there is another podcast I can recommend to anyone, to everyone, and it's Brian Shaw. I'm not sure if you guys would know him, but he's a strong man, and he did a podcast with Eddie Hall, which is probably much more famous in the UK. Who both of them were the world's strongest man at some point. They've both won the competition. And on the podcast, Eddie talks about, so when he was between, like, I think it was 6 and 12, he used to be a swimmer. He swam for like he was trying to get into Team GB. And he fell out with his coach when he was around 12. And he slid into, because he wasn't, he didn't have a purpose in life and he didn't know what he was doing. He slid into a very self-destructive depression. So getting into fights, he went to prison a few times. He got expelled. And he says it all in the podcast, and he gets quite emotional about it. And he talks about how he had suicidal thoughts, and he used to just sit in his room all day and not really know what to do with himself, and was depressed. And one day his mother, remember, he's only 14 at this point, his mother sat him down and said, like, you can't be doing this. This is just no way to live. So they decided that he would try the gym. And this also feeds into our other point. And he says in the podcast that the gym saved his life.
Yeah.
And he went from being depressed in his room to literally the strongest man in the world.
Yeah, literally.
So like the power of overcoming failure. And he looks back on it now, not fondly, obviously, but it's a great moment of triumph for him.
Yeah. That's a perfect example to give. That's a perfect example, and I'm sure you must have them as well, cousin. I certainly these to varying degrees difficulty and overcoming the difficulty, right? And the Aeneid is just an epic Roman tale of and obviously intertwined with mythology and a little bit of philosophy in there too, of just like that abstract concept applied on the epic scale, and I absolutely love it. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the book starts. It's technically a poem. I think we should call it a poem.
An epic poem, yeah.
Yeah. It's
they're not really written anymore.
No, not
epic
really.
Poetry. I think the last epic poem was is it called Paradise Lost?
I really don't know.
I think it's the last one. It was like in the 1600s. So when people go back to try and read them, it's quite difficult because it's not like a narrative in terms of. Well, it is a narrative, but it's not built. It's not written and structured like a book, like you're probably used to.
Yeah. It's filled with like long.
It's
very. It depends on the translation. You can get Shakespearean translations, or you can get sort of practical ones. The hardback copy I keep by my bed is the Penguin Classics, translated and introduced by I think David West. Yeah,
is that the one you would recommend?
Yeah, I would.
Is that a more narrative driven one, or is it more of a literal translation?
It's
would you say
there's obviously none of the translations vary in the story. It's just how the words that they use, the type of English that they use to describe it. So the more, if you really do enjoy flowery poetry, not necessarily like cringy poetry, probably the word that springs to mind, obviously, that isn't what's written in the books. But if you're going for more descriptive, elaborate, flagrant descriptions and words, definitely the more Shakespearean you go, you will find it's like really lucid. It's it's brilliantly written. It's like incredible literature.
It is incredible, yeah.
And then obviously the further you go, like this David West really isn't poetic translation. So you don't get but obviously it's easier to digest, right? Because you're not thinking like, wait, what does that word mean?
I quite like that though, the fact that you can pick.
Yeah, of course.
It's incredible that a piece of writing written in Latin, translated to like through probably multiple languages to English, still holds up. Especially with like the ancient Greek ones as well, like from ancient Greek to Latin, probably to French and then to English, it's like still holds up.
Yeah, definitely. So I remember when I read the first one, I read, find it kind of the more dramatic, poetic translation, and I remember just reading it, and it just genuinely took my breath away. Like the picture that it paints. There's this one scene where they're talking about the Trojans are like sailing over the Mediterranean, and it's a night sky, and it's perfectly still and calm, and like the heavens are gliding over them, and it's just this brilliant language that just really takes you there. But anyways, to the point. So it depends on the translation you read. Obviously, easier, simpler English is obviously easier to digest, and vice versa. So the poem begins about a quarter of the way through the storyline of the Aeneid. And this is the first thing I kind of want to talk about, actually. The story starts by introducing you to the divine machinery of the ancient European Hellenistic, or Hellenic, paradigm, which is essentially the Greek Olympic gods. And the Romans, basically, once they took Greece, they were like, this is actually pretty good.
And Greece so they kind of conquered them culturally, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so they changed the names a bit for some of the deities, etc. And you're introduced to the gods of Olympus, specifically Juno, the queen of heaven. And she has a very strong hatred of the Trojans. for reasons which we shan't get
Yeah.
into because they're kind of pointless. But what you need to understand is that Juno hates the Trojans, right? She hates them. She hates them. She hates them. Full stop. She doesn't want them to succeed. And so the book starts by Juno unleashing the mother of all tempests onto the Trojan fleet that are like that are escaping Troy, right? They've been on their wanderings for a couple of years at this point, once the poem starts. And so Juno unleashes a storm on the Trojans whilst they're sailing around in the Mediterranean, trying to find their promised land, so to speak. And this is the first philosophical point that I love in this book, right? So the storm hits, and the book describes the skies turn black and thunder shakes the ocean, and the waves are throwing the ships into the seabed. It's just a fucking nightmare for them, right? Like the Trojans are getting fucked.
Yeah.
It is not a good situation. And Aeneas takes to the deck and he's shouting out to his crew to hold fast to courage, basically. And it's just this perfect hyperbolic metaphor again, which is why I love the book so much. For when things are going wrong in life, let me actually get to there's a quote that I absolutely love. So everything's going sideways for the Trojans at this point. They're getting wrecked. Juno hates them. They're not in a good place. And Aeneas steps onto the deck and shouts to his crew to hold fast to courage, and he says, "Summon up your courage once again. This is no time for gloom or fear. The day will come, perhaps, when it will give you pleasure to remember even this." And
it's what we were talking about earlier, isn't it? Of moments of triumph.
Exactly. He calls to the sailors and to his people, the Trojans. This sucks, I know. The literal wrath queen of heaven is against us. We're not in a good place, but he calls out to them and says, "Be strong. Lift your spirit to match the struggle, and fight the struggle, resist it, go into it, hold fast in the difficulty of life." And the last point, the day will come, perhaps, when it will give you pleasure to remember even this, yeah, you are right. It's exactly what we were talking about a moment ago, where if I should say when you push through as the storm clears, and you, whether it's a breakup, whether it's getting fired, whether it's having fallen out with someone, whether it's just feeling hopeless about life, when your ship metaphorically is being thrown around by the heavens, when everything's going wrong for you in life, steel your resolve, pull yourself together, focus, grit your teeth, and fight it. And what Aeneas is telling you, as he is to his crew, is that when you get out of this, you may look back on it and actually even enjoy it. And that's a profound thing. Obviously, in the moment, it's not what's on your mind, but it is true. As you and I, and I'm sure most of the listeners can agree, it is true. You look at the breakup, you look at when things went wrong with that friend, and you look at what the path of your life since then, and you realize that actually it did teach you a valuable lesson. You are stronger for it. You are more experienced for it, and you're a different person for it. And in some way, even if it's a small way, you are glad that it happened. And that's the first principle.
Yes.
That's the first one I take from the book. And yeah, I just love that so much. Just triumph over defeats.
It's a huge shift, because a lot of people, mostly it's said these days, is thinking tactically. But they think on the small, like, how do I solve this problem right in front of me? Like the tactics of how do I solve this? This is the only thing. And I feel like that mindset is shifting you to a more strategic mindset of like the forward thinking, the bigger picture. If you can not become completely like suffocated and overwhelmed with the short term.
Yeah.
You can see that, I'm not going to let this destroy me. And one day I will look back in triumph at this moment and smile.
Yeah, that's brilliant, man. That's really well said, and I completely agree. It's kind of like as much as like the emotional pull is into the moment, and you just want to get tossed up into the seas of emotion, and just tears fill your eyes, anger fills your heart. You're like, you're getting pulled apart by life, and if you can, which is what Virgil urges you to do, this is what we urge you to do, dear listener, is just take a breath, steel your resolve, and kind of zoom out. Put things into perspective, as my cousin just brilliantly said. Put things into the perspective of the big picture. Look at the grand journey that you're on, and you'll see that this, although is a very pretty, in different magnitudes, is a very horrific storm that you may be going
of course.
through. In the big picture, you will realize that, one, it's worth it, and two, you can do it.
Mm-hmm. And this is why the first 2 episodes are so important. Because if you've gone from, some skinny dude who can't bench press much, and now all of a sudden you've pushed through all those challenges, and now you're confident in your strength physically, and then you're confident in your strength mentally. I've pushed through, this porn addiction. I've conquered it. That's a fantastic foundation to push through these struggles on. You can look inward and think, I can conquer this. I've conquered others, and I can conquer this. And I will look back, and although this storm might be the darkest hour of my life, I did not give in. I did not fail, and it will seem even brighter when you do conquer it, and you will.
Exactly. Yeah, brilliantly said, bro. Exactly. Like I think it's Peterson who says, "The darker the abyss, the brighter the light." So, and kind of the point we made earlier, like the more difficult things are, the more valuable they are. So yeah, that let's tie a bow around that point there. Let's leave it at that. When things are going wrong, when you find yourself metaphorically in the storm,
in God's wrath, literally.
Yeah. When you're in that place, give yourself one. Just channel your courage, bring your full metal to bear on it, and two, appreciate it in its own perspective. Put it in perspective, and understand that one day you could actually look back upon and see the good that it was, as much as it doesn't feel like it now. So there you go. So after that, in the story, Aeneas basically gets shipwrecked in North Africa. And he meets the queen of the kingdom he lands in there in North Africa. And I don't want to get into the story too much. I really don't care too much for viewing the book as a whole. But basically, once he lands and is sort of taken in, and the Trojans are taken in as refugees, he explains the story of the fall of Troy. And he basically has a flashback, and he's describing what happened and how he escaped, and how he tried to escape with his family. His wife was killed in the sack of Troy. He goes on to explain kind of what happened, how it went down. And in that monologue is the second point that I really, really want to bring up with this episode, and something that I don't think you and I have actually spoken about properly before, James. And it's something that's a very, very new discovery of mine.
Okay.
That I'm really coming to grips to. There's a scene where, as his city is burning, as his people are being raped, killed, murdered, destroyed, as everything he loves apart around him, he's running through the palace trying to find King Priam, I believe, or I can't remember exactly who he's trying to find, but he's running around the palace as the Greeks are sacking it. And there's this one beautiful scene in it where Aeneas runs past the bedchamber as he's looking for, it escapes me who he's looking for, but he sees Helen.
Oh yeah.
And to provide a bit more context, the reason the Greeks went to Troy was for Helen. Paris, who's a Trojan prince, stole Helen, who was queen of Sparta, away from the Greeks and took her back to Troy with him. And so the Greeks invaded. And so essentially, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a bit more philosophical than that, which we'll have to get into in a Greek episode, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the Trojan War happens because Helen goes to Troy. Whether Paris stole her or whether she went of her own accord, that's what the scholars debate.
Indeed.
Have been debating for thousands of years at this point. But just for the time being, the reason the Trojan War happened is because Helen's there. And Aeneas, in the midst of the absolute slaughter of everything he loves, he runs past the bedchamber and sees Helen in it, completely defenseless. And he stops and he looks at her and she looks at him. And just put yourself in that perspective, right? The Greeks deceived the Trojans. They couldn't beat them on the battlefield. They couldn't conquer them in a fair fight. So they betrayed them, basically. They betrayed their good faith using the Trojan horse. Every person he loves is being killed. The people of the city are being killed. The babies are being thrown from the walls. The women are being raped. And the men are being murdered. It's just the city's burning. It's a shit show. And it's all because of her. And Aeneas is looking at this woman, and the book does this brilliantly poetic piece of just how much he hates her. Like he's just looking at this. He's looking at this woman, the face that launched 1,000 ships.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking at her and thinking, "You are the reason this is. You absolute bitch." So he starts moving towards her, sword in his hand, ready just to seek absolute, complete, total vengeance on this absolute wretch that brought destruction to everything he loves. And then Aeneas's mother comes to him. And Aeneas's mother, and this is where it gets interestingly philosophical, right? Aeneas's mother is Venus, the goddess of love, or Aphrodite. Aphrodite. Yeah, in Greek. Aeneas's mother is Venus, goddess of love. And in his moment of absolute
rage,
hatred and rage, and just complete, total give in to hatred and darkness, he seeks to kill this woman, just who's a completely defenseless woman, and seek vengeance for all of the bad and evil that she's brought to his people and his city. And Venus comes to him as her goddess self. She comes to him and says, "No, my son, what good will this do to you?" And I don't want to get into it too specific because I don't want to ruin it. But Venus comes to Aeneas and she basically touches his heart with love, right? That's the philosophical element of Venus coming to him, and not, say, Jupiter. Like love comes to Aeneas and says to him, "No, this is not how you're going to rebuild Troy. This isn't how you're going to move forward. This is only a downwards path towards hatred, despair. The act of vengeance, the act of hatred is only ever a downwards one." And so Venus touches his heart with love and reminds him of his own family, of the good that he can do, even in the midst of this horrible defeat, this absolutely humiliating, torturous, painful, despair, awful situation he's in. Love comes to Aeneas and makes him realize what he has to do to get out in a positive trajectory. And it does this brilliant poetic piece. I really can't do it justice, but I'm sure you get the point. He's at the precipice of killing Helen and probably getting caught by Greeks in the process and killed himself, and then the rest of his family and the rest of his people are left there and they all die. Or he's touched by love and he can choose to escape with his own family and lead the survivors of his people into the future. And this is something I've never really considered until a few weeks ago when I was reading Seneca's letter on slaves, on the concept of forgiveness.
Ah, yes.
And the true, a word which we rarely use in the modern world. The path of grace. It's this act of forgiveness and letting go of hatred and only ever seeking the higher path of forgiveness and love and grace. And I feel like that situation in the poem is just another perfect hyperbolic metaphor for that. It's just that perfect example of this binary decision of just seek absolute vengeance in your like hatred soaked, blood soaked, just despicable act of inhumanity.
This
which
really
might feel good temporarily, or you seek the higher path of grace through love.
This really ties well into I won't go into depth on it here, but the manga series Vinland Saga. The whole story is about basically what you're talking about right here.
Yeah.
So in really, really short form, so spoilers for Vinland Saga, but it's only brief. Basically, it's about a Viking kid, and basically he watches his father get murdered. And his father was the strongest Viking, but he'd chosen a path of forgiveness, right? And he gets deceived by this man called Askeladd and murdered. And so Thorfinn, who's the main character, is like, I think he's 6 at this point. So he gets consumed by vengeance, right? And revenge. So he tries to kill Askeladd, but he wants to kill him in a 1v1 duel, basically 1v1 me on Rust. Because it's like Viking age, right? And he thinks that his father would think less of him if he killed him in his sleep.
Quick scopes only. Yeah.
So anyway, fast forward ages. Basically, Thorfinn has to do great deeds on the battlefield to gain a duel with this man, Askeladd.
Yeah.
And every time he does the duel, he lets he'll do a great deed on a battlefield, and he'll give him the duel, and he'll let vengeance overtake him. And he'll lose, right? He won't kill it. Like, Askeladd doesn't kill him, but he'll lose the duel. It turns around, and Askeladd gets murdered by somebody else. So Thorfinn loses this chance to take vengeance.
Yeah.
And Thorfinn's father's ideology was a true warrior doesn't need a sword.
Yeah.
And Thorfinn goes through a lot of soul searching, and he ends up becoming a slave. Like, you're talking about slavery there, right? And not by his choice, obviously. He doesn't make himself a slave. And there's a really powerful quote. I'm not going to go into detail about spoilers or anything, but Thorfinn's been beaten up at this point, right? He's really disheveled, but he wants to found a country where there's no wars and no freedom. That's his goal in the show. And
no wars and no freedom.
No freedom, no slavery, no wars and no slavery, right? So it's freedom.
All well over here, bro.
And he, the really famous quote from the show is, "I have no enemies." So he basically he's been beaten at this point, right? And the king comes to him, and they're basically his friends, slave friends, are saying why aren't you killing the guy? Because Thorfinn's a fantastic fighter.
Yeah, I got you.
And it's why aren't you killing this guy?
I have no enemies.
And he says, I have no enemies.
Yeah, that is brilliant. That is brilliant.
And we'll go into more depth on it, because there's a lot more to unpack with Vinland Saga. But
let's save it for that episode.
Yeah, definitely. But it very much mirrors. That's what brought me to the same conclusion. And that quote, "Let me forgive," and because you forgive someone, like Aeneas forgiving Helen, right? Not killing her, basically, not taking his revenge. It doesn't mean you have to forget what they've done and not hold them accountable. But that forgiveness, that grudge, is only hurting you at that point.
Yeah.
From being free. So Juno touching his heart is freeing him in a way.
Venus, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Venus.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely, bro. Yeah, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean forget. It just means to let go of the hatred in your heart.
Exactly, because look what he achieved by letting go.
Exactly, and that's brilliantly said, man. I love that quote. I have no enemies.
Mm-hmm.
That's I can't wait to get to that episode, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good one.
yeah, awesome. I love that, man. But yeah, and that's the second point that we really want to get across with this episode is take heed of Aeneas's example,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm sure whoever's done you wrong in your life did not do you as wrong as Helen did the Trojans. I promise you that.
Yeah.
Like I can imagine someone listening to this has had something pretty bad done to them, but in no way could it possibly be, in either the case of Vinland Saga or the case of Aeneas and Helen. It's like,
Your entire country and culture being destroyed and everything you
yeah,
love.
exactly. And it's this point of forgiveness, grace, seek a higher path above it's one of these intangible, undescribable things that just doesn't fit well into language. It's something you have to feel and just kind of meditate on. I'm going to try my best to describe it, but it's like put yourself above petty conflict and grievances. You know what I mean? Put yourself above this hatred. And you're absolutely right. The only person it really hurts at any point is yourself. When you when you are holding on to that and just seeking revenge, it's driving you to bad places. And yeah, just to take that point, the last point.
They're still like, if you're holding this hatred and it's holding you back, then
Yeah.
they're still like, if you want to look at it as a revenge, the sort of thing, they're still winning. They're still holding you back.
Yeah.
That person is still being a detriment to your life. Like you have to let it go.
It's still hurting you. Yeah. Exactly, man. Exactly. And so that's the principle. Venus love comes to Aeneas in his moment of hatred and touches his heart and says, "Don't do this, my son." Instead, and she says, "Think of your own family. Think of your own." He has a child, and he says, "Do you want him to grow up without a father? What about your people? What are they going to do if you die? What are they going to do with no one to lead them?" And it's this idea of just letting, again, it's just impossible to fit into words. It's a feeling. It's just a higher feeling. Just let go of the hatred. Don't forget, but just completely forgive and move forward. And that is the meaning of grace. It's a higher path of life where you don't hold on to petty insults or enemies. You just forgive. Someone does you wrong, forgive and move on. Look to your own future. Not rather than looking back and seeking revenge on the past. Look to your future. Look to yourself, your family, your people. Look to what you can do and move on. And again, to stay in line with the theme of this episode, to seek triumph over your defeats. Seek triumph over your defeats. Let go, forgive, seek grace, and move forwards, move up, move on. And I absolutely love that. Yeah, really. I can't remember what the number of the letter of Epistolae Morales it is, but honestly, I read it and reread it. Like whenever I finish that book, I just start again, and every morning I read a letter and reflect and meditate and write on it. And I've read it probably like 4 or 5 times now, and every time I read it, it just really brings home this idea of just complete forgiveness, complete, total.
Think about it. Imagine if Aeneas hadn't seen Helen, right?
Yeah.
And he leaves on this voyage and he decides, I'm going to find her and I'm going to kill her, right? That's what his mission becomes. Then Rome is never founded. His people never thrive. They probably all die.
Yeah.
So that is, a way of looking at it. Found your Rome and don't be consumed by hatred.
Exactly. Yeah. She comes to him and says, "No, how could you stoop so low? Basically, think of your own think of your son, think of your wife, think of your father, and think of all the good that you can do, and move on. So yeah, that's just wrap that point up there. That's something that I absolutely loved. Seek grace, even in the most bitter of defeats. Seek grace. Grace. Be above pettiness. Be above insult. Be above wretched behavior. Just forgive it. Let go. Don't be affected by it. Forgive them. Forgive them. And it really, when I really realized this, I was like, fuck, this is so true, right? You have to be in a place of strength to do that.
Indeed.
Forgiveness, grace is just the ultimate superlative act of strength.
It's a do you know what this whole reminds me of as well?
What's that?
You know that quote in Lord of the Rings, the scene, sorry, you know where Gandalf is talking to Frodo, or Frodo's more talking to Gandalf in Moria?
Yeah.
And he's talking about killing Gollum. And Frodo says it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the chance.
Yeah.
And then Gandalf says, "Pity. It's a pity that it's pity that stayed Bilbo's hand." And then here's the quote: "It's like many that live deserve death, some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends."
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's. I mean, Tolkien, of course, always a good shout.
Yeah, well, that's a man that went to war. Like Tolkien.
Yep.
Had been to like real. He'd been in World War One, bro. That is the worst.
Like meat grinder.
Yeah, bro. So
rat fest.
It's. I only make that point because it's like it's a. You can see the same point coming up in lots of profound literature over the ages. You know.
Yeah.
You've got a completely modern one.
Timeless ideal, right?
Yeah, you've got a completely modern one in Vinland Saga, and then you've got the the 20th century's Lord of the Rings, and then you can go back. If you want to go to zero, like the year zero, Christianity, I'm sure preaches a lot of forgiveness, and then you go back to Aeneas. So it's Sophia Perennis. It's perennial wisdom, right?
Yeah,
it keeps popping up.
Yeah, it is. It is the way. It is the divine path.
It is.
Seek grace, and this is something. This is just something I just encourage everyone to do. Is just think of all the things that keep you up at night, right? Or just the moments in your life where you catch yourself thinking, fuck this guy, bro. Fuck this guy. I can't believe you fucking talked to me like that. Or like, I just can't. You know, when you're face to face with Helen and you're like, I'm going to fucking like, just realize. And to the last part of that Tolkien quote, right? What's it? Not even the wise can foresee.
Yeah, even the very wise cannot see all ends.
Boom, right? Here's something I really need to say about it. The most beneficial course of action in any situation that involves this difficulty, the most productive, positive, best course of action in any case, bar none, every single case is to seek the path of grace. And that did kind of rhyme, but that's not the point. Seek forgiveness. Forgive them. Like just be at peace with the tragedy of the past, whatever it was. Don't forget. I'm not saying you have to go back to being friends with someone who fucked you over, but you internally in your heart, you must forgive it. You must forgive them if you are to be free, if you are to move on, build something that you love, something that fills you. You must let go of this weight which is dragging you down. Forgive them, and every single case, never let it cross your mind that it's a good thing to seek revenge, to plot some kind of mischievous, to continue the fight. You know what I mean? In every single case, metaphorically stand up, smile, and walk away. And yeah, I absolutely love that. And is it? Yeah, the text, of course, puts it in brilliant terms, and I absolutely love the metaphor. Yeah, and so to move on from that, because we just did a number on that, right? The story continues. Aeneas leads the Trojans out of Carthage, which is Rome's arch enemy, and Juno basically I won't go into the details.
We won't go into that, but
he leaves. He lands. He finds Italy, the shores of Lavinium, and everything's going really well with the locals until it doesn't, and then they have to wage bloody wars against each other for like 6 chapters, and then eventually, Jupiter decides, and Rome is essentially the path of Rome. And yeah, I would say we there's so much you get into it. This is a text that was written 2 millennia ago that's still in print today. There's something about this story that is just timeless.
Definitely resonates with people.
So much we could get into, but that's kind of those 2 points I think are 2 digestible points, right? Strive through difficulty, steel yourself against the difficulty of life, and never forget your gratitude. Keep things in perspective. Have courage to face difficulty. Don't curse the gods. Face the difficulty in your life with courage. And 2, seek the path of grace. Forgive, move on, and live your life in love, not hatred.
Because they do kind of go in tandem, because whatever is causing the storm, I'm sure you'll need to forgive at some point. So it's kind of both points are what you need to really focus on to really free yourself from that storm.
Absolutely. So that's the general story of the Aeneid. It's the story of triumph, of the light of Troy rising of absolutely heinous, despicable deceit and murder, to use that word. And it's brilliant. It's fantastic. It's the story of the human spirit. It's so much to love about it. It's written brilliantly. So much poetic taste for you to enjoy. And yeah, but something it also introduces you to is the Hellenic divine machinery, right? The gods of Olympus. And this is something that's absolutely fascinating. We touched upon Prometheus in episode 2. There's so much to learn from this worldview, and yeah, I love the idea of. Well, I don't love the idea of it, but it's interesting to think that actually sometimes the reason bad things happen isn't because of some great plan that a single deity has. It's actually because there is actually a conflict within heaven. And that's just an interesting thought to ponder. That, of course, the monotheistic thought doesn't quite explain why bad things happen. It's all part of the single plan, and be grateful and rejoice. And for some people, that just doesn't cut it, man. It's like I just don't get why, so much is wrong. Why is there so much evil? How can this be? And when you through the Greek Hellenic paradigm, you do actually understand it has a far more logical explanation for it. So yeah,
we could unpack. I'm sure we will do a lesson on Christianity. Well, not a lesson, an episode.
Yeah, definitely
on Christianity and the problem of evil that it has, like you were talking about.
Yeah,
but the Hellenic view and the Zoroastrian view as well, they both give much more logical, like you say, answers to the problem.
Yeah. So yeah. Let's definitely future episodes for sure. But I would say those are the points I wanted to make with this episode.
Yeah, man, it's been pretty good. It's been insightful.
Yeah. So the Aeneid, Virgil, the Roman epic, and in future episodes we'll definitely have to give the the backdrop to it. I told you over the summer about the Stephen Fry trilogy.
Oh yeah,
Greek trilogy, absolutely brilliant. Fully recommended to everyone listening. Mythos, Heroes, and Troy. You don't necessarily have to read heroes. It's interesting, but you don't have to. But definitely Mythos and Troy. It brilliantly written. Storytelling is incredible. The detail is brilliant. The insights are absolutely awesome. And I've read the original texts of the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and I regret it because you really don't have to. You can just read those 3 books.
If you are passionate about it, then it's something you can do. But it is definitely
yeah,
those books are definitely a lot more digestible.
Yeah, definitely. They're brilliant, and that's definitely in future we'll definitely have to unpack the Greek mythology and the underlying philosophy underneath it, because even if you don't believe in it, it still teaches you brilliant eternal concepts that are just absolutely perfect.
Well, it's not a perfect system. Obviously, like there are things to our modern life that are just absolutely appalling. But look at the world they built off that system.
Yeah.
There are lessons to be learned.
Definitely. So there we go. I would say that's Ep.3 wrapped up.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. At Path of the Ninth on Instagram, on YouTube, obviously. You can click subscribe right now if you want to stay up to date on future videos. We have big things planned.
Yeah.
All
right, and remember, I have no enemies. Peace.
Yes, I love that.